Hey folks, Chad Perkins here with a little tutorial to look at how to create magic effects inside of Maxon 1. Of course, we're going to be looking a lot at Trapcode Particular, which is kind of like the reigning champion of magic making, but there's a lot of other cool tools we can use in addition to Particular and with Particular as well. This tutorial is going to be divided up into 3 sections. We're first going to look at creating particle trails, like a little bit more sophisticated particle trails, and that's going to be kind of like the basis of a lot of what we're going to do throughout the tutorial. We're also going to look at how to create more complex motion using a series of nulls. And we're also going to look at a slew of other magical tools outside of Particular, or maybe some things inside of Particular that we might not have thought of for magical effects. So tons of fun stuff here. Let's get started. Now, as we look at creating particle trails, let's talk about a few things really quick. Number one, we want to change the color of the particles. If I select this layer here in this first composition, we have just white particles. They just feel like boring and plain. They don't feel like they're alive with light, like they're glowing. And to make magical effects, we want to make sure that we're in 32 bits per channel. We can option click this. If it says 8 BPC, we can option click it till it says 16 BPC, option click it again till it says 32 BPC, and then we can use this trick. It doesn't work in 8 bits per channel mode. So I can open up the particle section in Particular, and I can click on the white color swatch here. And when you're in 32 bits per channel mode, pure white is created by making 1 in each channel. So that's like full white is 1, 1, 1. But we can also go over white in the same way that light in the real world can get brighter than regular white. Like I have my AirPod thing here and like that's white, but it doesn't blind me. It's not like glowing white. It's just kind of there, you know, it's not that bright. So what we can make this is super white. So we could take these values, like say 2 in the red channel, and you could already see that this is kind of glowing a little bit on the edges in the same way like neon or something like that would. And so we can create maybe not 3. For some reason I'm getting a glitch on my system where these particles are not like, this should look almost white, but I'll just take this down to 2 for right now. Maybe you can even increase the size of these particles and maybe increase the feather on the edges of those particles. So you can see they kind of have this like glowing effect to them, like they're white, but when we blur those edges, it creates these like neon glows. And so if you're creating magical effects like with particles and stuff like that, this is a really cool way to go. Now, the next trick is we're gonna take those particles and we're gonna make a straight line, which I realize sounds very uneventful, but hang with me. We're gonna learn some cool things along the way for that. I'm gonna go ahead and go to the emitter section and I'm going to start over here. I'm just gonna move the X axis of the position property, set a keyframe, move in time, and we'll move it along the X axis towards the right, and we will create a trail. Now this is pretty cool. If we scrub this, you know, it looks better. It kind of creates this cool motion or whatever. But what we want to do is, again, make a particle trail. So I'm going to go down to velocity and I'm going to kill the velocity. Take this down to just 0 and see what that looks like. And so then we have this straight line of particles. Now, again, that doesn't seem that amazing, but it starts to be amazing pretty quickly. Let's go to the next composition here where I've created this line of particles that moves around. And basically what I've done here is the same thing we did in this straight line, except that I increased the particles per second, and then you could go into the particle area and change the life to change how long this little trail is. So maybe I take the life down to like 1 second and it's really short. Or maybe I take it up to 3 seconds and open up the size over life. So then we have these particles shrink down over time. And I'll just use one of these little handy dandy presets here, like linear slope, click OK. And so now the particles start big when they're first born, and then over time they shrink, and that creates this kind of comet look. So by having a straight line of particles, we can start to sculpt them and play with them in ways that maybe don't look like a bunch of like particles or sparkles moving around. Another thing that we can do, now that I have this example here of this line moving around, is we could add turbulence to this. So I'll select my layer. I'm going to go into environment. There's a couple of different ways to create turbulence. We could go into displace and adjust the turbulence field, which is similar to the old way of doing things in particular. But this isn't great. If we increase TF displace, we start to get some randomness in our line, which is really cool. But then as our line moves around, it just doesn't feel realistic. Like these particles, if they were real particles, they wouldn't move like they're still being controlled, like they're still on a path. So this moves like the path that they're on, but then it keeps them there. Now, sometimes you might want that, but not today, my friends. We don't want that today. So a more advanced way of doing this is going to the environment section and adjusting the air turbulence. And let's say we have this invisible turbulence going on behind the scenes and we have it affect the position of the particles. So now they're moving around, but as I move this, as these particles are affected by this air turbulence, they behave the way that we would expect particles to behave, where they kind of keep going in that direction. They keep going on that path, which is really cool. It creates some really beautiful effects, and it feels much more organic when we do that. Now, you might still not be super impressed, and that's fine, but watch this. If we go to emit from parent, and we take this line of turbulence, this new composition here, emit from parent, we have this thing, we know how to do this, we just have this line. Basically, I just use the wiggle expression to kind of make it wiggle around a little bit more, add a little bit of air turbulence to it. But if we go here and we choose to add a system to this, click on add a system, and then we add another system. And I think this might be easier to adjust. Usually I like using the designer, but for this, I'm just gonna go ahead and click apply, come back to the effect controls panel. And actually, let me do something. There's a little bug currently in this version of particular that I'm using, where when we go into the designer, it kills the HDR particles that we created. So what I wanna do is I'm going to go ahead and on system 2, the new system, I'm gonna delete the color block so it inherits the color of the parent. That way we only have to fiddle with that one block when we fix it. I'll go ahead and click apply, and then I'll go to my primary system, open up particle, open up get to my color. Don't have to open anything up for that, but I'm gonna go ahead and hit, let's say 2, 1, 2 again. So we have that same kind of like a glowing neon-y color there. And then what we wanna do is go to system 2, the one we just added, the one's creating all this kind of like spray of particles everywhere. And we want to change the emitter behavior. We're going to go to emitter and change the type to emit from parent system. And then what I want to do, and I'll get a ton of particles. So sometimes you want to be careful. If you have a lot of particles, you might want to hit the caps lock key so you don't refresh a bunch of stuff or take down the particles per second. But I could take down the particles per second. Let's just say like 20 for right now. So we have a lot less particles, maybe even 10. And then also the emit probability. What's the probability that each one of the parent particles emits another particle? Because essentially what we've done is taken our initial system we created, and every single one of those particles is a particle emitter. So I'll take down the emit probability down to maybe like 20%, and there we have that. And maybe we take down the velocity to like 10%, or maybe even less than 10%, maybe 0%. And maybe now we can increase the particles per second up to 20, which makes this like a little bit thicker. And maybe we want like a little bit of velocity. But now as we preview this, we start to have some more beautiful results, particle results, as we have these particles that are emitted from our parent system. So just starting with that straight line, we've already started to create something a lot more, organic, something that just feels more realistic as these particles kind of drift and fall. I really love the way that looks. Probably what I want to do, honestly, is take the emit probability up to 80%. I'm going to watch myself, because sometimes when I'm giving tutorials, I'm kind of like, you know what, let's play with this. And I lose track of what I'm doing, because I'm like, this is fun. Let's keep playing around and goofing around. And maybe take size random. Okay, I'm going to stop this. I'm doing the thing I just said that I do too often. I need to like grow up and stop this. Take life down to 1 second. I'm out of control. I need help. Okay, so as I scrub this, look at that. See? How could you not want to play with that? Don't judge me. I'm working on it. I'm a work in progress. Now, as I click on this last composition, just just for my own sanity, I'm just going to move on here. We have this giving particles weight composition. So here's one I played with a little bit more, spent a little bit more time with. And we have these sparkles emitting from the parent system, really cool particle system. But another thing that we often forget is what these particles would weigh. And often if you go through like the animation of particles, like when Disney was creating stuff for Disneyland, these old promos, they would have this weight to the particles that they behave differently. And if you're animating this by hand, as they had to do back then, you really put a lot of thought and effort into how these particles behave and what do they weigh, what's their behavior once they're born. And when you're using digital tools like Particular, a lot of that stuff's just done for you and you just kind of don't think about it as much. So in order to create better magic, we kind of have to be just more intentional and be more aware of what we're doing. So I could go into my primary system, let's say, and I can go into maybe my environment, and maybe I want to increase the gravity so that when these particles are born, they're really heavy and they just drop off like that. That's kind of a cool look. We could also go the opposite direction and have these particles just kind of like ascend, like they're made of light, like they're very effervescent. Little Alka-Seltzer bubbles flying up like that. It's pretty cool. So that's the end of section 1 here. Let's move on to section 2, where we're going to talk about creating a little bit more complex motion by using nulls. I'm going to go ahead and open up my little nulls intro comp, and I'm going to close the other panels in this group to kind of give us a little bit more clean working space here. And I basically have two little solids here. I have a blue one and an orange one. And the blue one is animated going upwards, and the orange one is animated going from left to right. Just like this. But here's the interesting thing. If we go back to frame 0, where they're both in the same spot, and we parent the orange one to the blue one, so the blue one is the parent of the orange one, then without changing anything else, now we've changed the motion. It's like we've given the orange one its original motion and also infused it with the motion of the blue one. And so again, we didn't do anything to the orange one other than parent it, but here we have this thing. Now, what's really cool about this is let's go to this frame right here, and maybe let's make these both 3D. I'll unlock this one. Let's make this both 3D, and 3D bin. And then as I adjust the rotation of the blue one, you see that the orange one kind of comes along for the ride. So as we're kind of working with these tools, we can do some really advanced stuff, especially because as we apply Particular, I'll just go ahead and just apply Particular really quickly here. One of the things that we can do is that we can go into the emitter and click on Create Null. And what this does is it creates a null in our timeline panel. It's just a regular null, but we can use it to control the particular particles now. They are emitted from the origin point of this null, which is pretty cool. Now, again, it's really important to note that this is just a regular null, just a regular old null, and we can control it in the same way we control other regular nulls. So all this advanced motion stuff I'm about to show you with nulls, we can use to control Trapcode particular particles. So I'm going to go over here to the nulls animated thing here, the nulls animated. And I basically have the same type thing. I have nulls, and in the other example I used solids, so it's a little bit more clear, but these are actual nulls. So I'll zoom in here so in the tutorial you can see like what's going on. And we have 3 of them. We have like stoplights. We have a yellow, green, and red. So the green one here, as you can see the name, it's an orbiting null. I'll just solo that really quickly. It's just rotating around itself in 3D space, just spinning, 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 spinning around its own axis. That's all it's doing. And then we have Y, the yellow one, and this is moving up, and we have the X1, kind of like we saw on the last one, moving left to right. So again, very, very simple motions in these 3 nulls. And kind of as before, I'm going to parent the X-axis null to the Y-axis null, but then I'm also going to parent the Y-axis null to the orbiting null. So our X-axis null, our red one, is now moving over and going up and spinning around and creating kind of like a corkscrew effect. So if I go to my particular particles and I do that thing again where I create a null, and then at the first frame here, where it's kind of like right there anyways, I parent this to the x-axis null, which again is inheriting all of the motion of these other nulls as well. Then when these particles spit out, we're creating a trail. It's like we're painting with this corkscrew. And I also took all the velocity off of these particles as before, just like just a straight line. And so we're seeing some really interesting, powerful results. And again, I can create a camera here and I can move around in 3D space and see that this is actually a three-dimensional corkscrew here. This is a three-dimensional corkscrew of particles that we created with those nulls, which is really cool. Here's an example of that. I created like a little cute little witch example. It's not that big of a deal, but kind of adorable. So you can see the little corkscrew that she makes as she's kind of like spinning around. I mean, she doesn't, but like, you know, her magic particles that she's spitting out of her broom kind of go in this like kind of cool circle. And again, this is three-dimensional. So if we wanted to like move her in 3D space or move the corkscrew in 3D space, we'd have these same swirl of three-dimensional particles, which is really cool. So again, you can create things like a DNA helix, a corkscrew, just more advanced stuff you can build in 3D with particles by using this more complex motion using nulls that are parented to each other. Now for the final section on our little journey into magic, we're going to look at other tools. We're actually going to start with the same tool. We're going to look at fluids inside of Trapcode Particular. I'm going to go ahead and go to close other panels in this group. And if I open up fluid motion, we'll see that I forgot to uncheck this before creating this example. So we're seeing the after first, which is actually kind of like a magic trick if you think about it. So maybe it was intentional. You never know. I don't reveal my secrets because I'm a magician. It's what we do. So if I turn off enable fluid motion, we could see these particles using the primary system and the emit from parent particles in the second system. And we have these particles kind of like moving up, but they're just kind of like spraying around, and the emitter's right here. It's cool, but it's lacking a little something. And just so you can see what's going on here, I'm going to create a new particular layer that's just particular, make it comp size, add particular to it. Then I'll open the designer. Okay, now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and hit the simulations block and check enable fluid motion. And we get the same warning sign, but as you can see here, we're actually seeing what's going on. And this is why I like doing this in the designer, because the designer can have these kind of gizmos that help you see really what's going on with your fluid simulations. So maybe I'll select my camera tool and kind of orbit around here a little bit so we can kind of get a better sense of what's going on here. And also, again, everything that's in this little box is going to be affected, and this arrow indicates which way the buoyancy is going. So we could adjust the buoyancy here. We could also adjust the region size, which determines like how much is being affected. Maybe I'll have like a really tiny region size, and then maybe I'll move this up. And when you're in the effect controls panel doing this without the designer, you can't really tell what you're doing. You're adjusting buoyancy, you're adjusting the size of everything, or the position, all that stuff, and you can't tell what's going on. So this is a much better way to work with fluids. So here we have the particles kind of shooting up, and then they go up, and they're affected once they get inside the container. So it's a little bit more clear to see like what's going on. Now, I will tell you that fluid simulations do really slow down your system, because it's not just kind of like a mock effect. It's actually creating a fluid simulation behind the scenes. It doesn't mean that your particles are going to look any different as far as like the material of them. So like they're not going to like look like liquid, but the behavior is actual fluid simulation. So it does take a while, but then you get this gorgeous, really fluid look to your particles there. And I created a little example here. If I go ahead and cancel out of this and go over to my working composition, this is a little beefy here. And what I have here is particles that are animated and with fluid motion moving around. And then I added a bunch of effects on top of that as well. And to see a final result of this, let's go to this fluids final. I added like a little top hat and a little magic wand. Taps 3 times, because 3 is magic for some reason. And then you see we have a bunch of kind of like weird movement. And so there's particular with fluid motion on these particles, but then also some stylization. Now, I'm not totally in love with the final result, to be honest with you, but I am really in love with the process. The fact that you can take all kinds of effects in After Effects and stylize these just simple particles and make stuff like this is really cool. Like, it's going in a cool direction. It would just need a little bit more fiddling in order to look better. And I didn't have that time to really dial in what I wanted. But again, it's the process that's very cool. So go back to this composition here, and I'll just turn these effects off so you can see like what I was dealing with here. So like I first added, so this is just like the regular, particles with the fluid effects on them. And so the behavior is really cool. And then I added the median effect, good old Photoshop median effect, which kind of creates this link between the particles. It blurs them in such a way that it almost like smears them together. It's almost like if you were just like kind of closing your eyes and squinting, but still there's that connection between them. So it's like a different level of blur. And I added a levels effect. I added turbulent displace, and that's really where this effect comes to life here, is you can just see this effect creating some really interesting tweaks there. Very, very cool. And then a universe effect called ecto, which we're going to get into. And that's, so if you wanted to create some kind of like smoky type system, some particles like that, that combination of particular with median and maybe levels, turbulent displace, ecto, very, very cool. Then I used the simple choker to choke back some of that glow, added median again, and there's also some curves and glows and things like that. And that's what got me to this final result here. I even left in a couple effects that I was kind of playing with, like CC vector blur. I couldn't get that quite to look quite right, but it is a potentially really cool effect as well. So something to play with. Now, really quickly, this is a side note. This isn't really like super important as far as magical things go, but I made this three-dimensional wand in After Effects using Mirror in the Trapcode suite. And what I did is just went to the geometry section, chose 3D model, and went to choose model. And then I picked the cylinder here. And then what I did was I just increased the size of this cylinder until it looked like a magic wand. And then I went and I made a comp of shape layers where I just had this like big gray one and then like a red one and a white one. And then I was able to use that as a texture inside of Mirror for the magic wand. And then the cool part of that is that, as you can see here, we can relight it, we can change the color of things, and it's responding to light. And it's like a three-dimensional object that I can light and animate in 3D, as you can see there. Now, one of the things that I liked that I was playing around with this and just in general is just kind of magical 3D backgrounds, just backgrounds that just feel kind of magical and have kind of cool magic-y patterns to them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new solid. I'm going to call this background. I'm going to make it black just because the light blue would be blinding at this point. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Now I'm going to show you how to create a cool animated magic background in just 2 steps. I think it's like 2 steps, basically 2 steps. I'm going to go to the window menu and I'm going to go to extensions and I'm going to choose the RG Universe dashboard. I'm going to go up to generators and I'm going to go to fractal background, which is like fractal noise. So like it's an effect that like I don't turn to very much when I'm in After Effects. I'm in other hosts, I do, but not in After Effects because I use fractal noise. But if I click on this once, you see that we get a bunch of like really cool presets that are already animated. So if I'm just looking for something just very quickly that I could just kind of like throw together, then this is like a really cool tool because I could just experiment and iterate very, very quickly without much effort. So I'm going to click on this vertical magic because it's called magic. Apply the preset. So there's one step. Just apply that preset. Boom. Then the next thing I want to do is apply CC Kaleido, which is going to take something and turn it like kind of into kaleidoscope version. So I apply CC Kaleido. And boom, there you go. Well, this isn't very magical, but what I can do is I can take down the size a little bit to it's a little bit smaller. And maybe let's rotate this on like a 45-degree angle. So it's like, like that. Yeah, see, now that's starting to be a little something. And then I could go into these settings, of course, and, increase the contrast and decrease the brightness and all these different things, change the speed and the scroll, the aspect if I wanted to do that. And because this is, kind of creating this like kaleidoscopic, weird, trippy effect, then when we start playing with something, we get very, very cool results by doing almost anything in the fractal background. So if I go to my final result, this is the thing that I came up with. I added some glow to this, some optical glow, and then I went into optical glow and increased the radiate setting, which kind of makes the light areas kind of look like shine, like Trapcode shine. Also, I increased highlights only, so the glow applied not only to, it didn't apply to the whole background. This is what optical glow looked like initially when I applied it. But as I increase highlights only, then it's only going to have glow applied to the brightest parts of the image, and it creates this kind of like cool, mysterious thing. And again, because this preset that we got from the dashboard is already animated for the fractal background effect, then this is already animated and looks really cool because of CC Collide, using those together. So, I mean, again, we could play with this. I might want to get this a little bit smaller so like the details a little bit more like fine-tuned and subtle and things like that, but some really cool things you can play with when you combine effects in that way. And speaking of Trapcode Shine, which I mentioned moments ago, let's look at Trapcode Shine. Trapcode Shine is an oldie but a goodie, and a great way to add some kind of cool, magical, mysterious effects because it creates volumetric light rays. And I can go ahead and select this. Basically what I've done is I just created a simple shape layer. If I click on the fill swatch, you'd see that, well, they didn't get any HDR values, but I could give it that now. Let's say 213 to give it that same kind of magic purple color we were playing with earlier. And then I'll go ahead and apply a shine to this. Now, it initially gets rid of all of our color, so I can go into Colorize and go to Colorize and just choose None. So it just doesn't colorize it. And I'm not liking the way that looks, so I might go back to my fill and take down the blue to like 2. There we go. And then let's change the source point so it's coming from the center of this or from below. So it's like creating these kind of streaks. And that's pretty cool as it is, but oftentimes with Shine, I find that I need to like kind of fiddle with it to get it where I want it to go. So I might want to boost the light a little bit to make this a little bit more intense. And then one of the things I really love doing is going into the fractal noise setting and enabling fractal noise, because that just adds a lot of life and movement to this. And it automatically animates, and it uses this evolution speed value in order to do that. And I find that by default, it's really, really strong. So I might take down the contrast a bunch, and I might take down the opacity. So it's just like a lot more subtle of an effect, but it adds a lot of realism to what we're going through with the noise. And then of course, best thing you could do in Shine is go to Shimmer. Open up Shimmer, increase the amount of shimmer, and there we have it. Then we have like streak light rays, and then we have like the fractal noise as the kind of like dirt in the air as it moves around. And then we've created this really cool magical effect, which is awesome. Just by way of comparison, here is the final result that I came up with here, where we have Shine and it's glowing in the background, and that's fun. Okay, 2 other quick effects I just want to run by really, really fast. Something to think about is Trapcode DAO, a really underappreciated effect and often misunderstood effect. What DAO does is it takes 3D geometry and extrudes it or has it follow along a path. And the paths that you can use can be paths that DAO generates by itself. It can use masks that you create as a path, and it can also use lights as a path. And because of all the magic that we made earlier with nulls, then when we're using lights, we can copy and paste or also parent lights to nulls, and lights can get in on this action too of complex motion. And then we could use that in DAO to do some pretty cool things. So if I turn on this layer, by default, the path that you get, or what you're seeing here, is just a regular circle because it's turned on the generate path automatically by itself. And you can see the 3D geometry being extruded around this circle path. We don't want that though. So I'm gonna turn this off so we have no path. And I actually want to create a path from the light because I have a light here that has that same corkscrew behavior that we were looking at earlier in this tutorial with the nulls. But in order for DAO to see it and use it as a path for the geometry, I have to change the name because because it's 3D geometry, we can relight DAO with lights as we want. So when it just sees a light that's just called light, then it's like, okay, do your thing. But if I take the name of this light and I call it DAO, or if that's like at least the presets, capital TAO, if that's the prefix for the light, then instead of having it light the 3D geometry, it becomes a path. And we could see it down here. You could see that show up, which is really cool. Well, actually in this case, we're not seeing anything because what I need to do is I need to go and change this light to be parented to the particular system null. And then it will, I'm gonna hide these layers again. And then what's gonna happen is it will build up over time as the light moves. So then I could go back into DAO and I can say build up and, well, let's just say maybe build up fast. And so then it builds up a little bit faster, but these chunks, look at how big that 3D geometry is. So I'm gonna go into the segment area and I will control the size here. I'll take this down to be smaller. There we go. Maybe we increase the number of segments. There we go, there we go, there we go. See how fast that renders too. So now it's following the path of the light and it's building on this 3D geometry. I'll just solo this layer so we just have this layer to deal with. So now we have, and it's all super glowy because I have optical glow on here as well, by the way. But as this is moving around, it's building 3D geometry. This is not particles like we saw earlier. This is actual three-dimensional geometry where we can move around and we can relight this, we can do whatever we want with it. So this stuff about the complex motion we created with the nulls earlier, this is also essentially with DAO a 3D sculpting tool, which is really kind of cool to play with as well, and another way to create magical effects. Now, the last effect that I want to show you very quickly is Ecto, which is really fun. I have a solid here, and I'm going to apply radio waves, the old effect radio waves to this, and then it just basically creates these like concentric circles that just kind of emanate out like so. Zoom in a little bit there. There we go. Just basic little lines that shoot out like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply Ecto, which is an effect from Red Giant Universe. And as we apply this, what it does is that it distorts whatever it's applied to, and it creates this kind of like fractal field around it. So it's great for creating kind of like fog, lightsabers, energy effects, any kind of like ectoplasmic ghost things, storm stuff, lightning bolts, that kind of thing. I can increase the distortion, and you can see that the path is then being distorted, and we can increase the size of this if we want to have more. Oops, nope. Maybe just like really just a little bit. Yeah, just a little bit there. And then we have this great complexity with just a couple of steps. So if you're looking for magical effects and you just want something just really quick, just something in the background, something that's very simple, like Ecto is a really a great choice for that, as you can see, because it just creates such beautiful effects. And this is just like, basically with the default settings. So if we were to go click choose a preset, then it would launch us into the section of the RG Universe dashboard where we could see all the many effects. So for fiery stuff, if we want, you can mouse over this and see kind of like the animation from this, flame outlines. And there's like ghosty ones, there's phantom, all this kind of stuff. This one is really cool. The deep, So really cool effects here. I love Ecto and think it's really worth playing with. So that's all I have for you, folks. Thanks for joining me on this little tour for creating magical effects through Maxon 1. Have a good one. Take care.